welcome everybody. We're going to be presenting today on the Building Bridges Initiative, and we are able to do this through the courtesy of SAMHSA and also the courtesy of the Technical Assistance Network. So let's begin. So I'd like to welcome also my presenters, my co-presenters today, which is Karen Ann Johnson and Katie Rushlow. Karen Ann will be presenting about engaging families, and Katie will be presenting about engaging youth. This particular initiative is focused on the overview of the National Building Bridges Initiative, and we also have webinars on our website, or soon to be on our website, on both family-driven care and youth-guided care. The one on youth-guided care was just done last Friday, and the one on family-driven care was done back in November with Fredla. So I invite you to check out those webinars where we more fully get into family-driven and youth-guided care. And so for all of you who are on the line, know that the Building Bridges Initiative is this national initiative to promote positive outcomes for youth and families who are touched by residential interventions and their community counterparts. It is not a model. It's a framework or a foundation. And how this really came about is if you look at the only seminal study done on residential outcomes, it was a study done a number of years ago, residential outcomes across the country, and it found that 75% of the youth who had been treated in a residential treatment center within 7 years of leaving care were either in an adult hospital, psychiatric hospital, or a prison. So the outcomes, the overall outcomes have been poor. There is no evidence based for residential, and yet research finds it's one of the most expensive after hospitalization with the least efficacy. But BBI really believes that we need residential. Every one of us wants to have every child live safely and with love in their homes, in their home communities. But we know this is not always the case, and hence we're going to need residential. And so hence programs such as Wraparound Milwaukee, which has been doing systems of care for many, many years, they're still residential programs. So BBI is about supporting both residential programs, their community counterparts, and all oversight agencies, whether they be state, county, city, system of care, whether they be managed care. It's about helping them and supporting them in what we call changing the paradigm from a focus solely on youth getting better in care during residential, which does not necessarily translate to ensure that they get better, that they stay better once they leave residential. So we're going to reinforce that a couple times that the research today, that the research doesn't really demonstrate that doing well within residential or improving within residential translates to doing well once one leaves residential. So the slide I've had up here for a few minutes now is really we want people to know it's not just about BBI. BBI is a national initiative, again, to support everybody who is a stakeholder with residential, including family and youth advocates, families and youth, and of course, as I said, oversight agency, residential community programs. But across the country, all human services, we're moving towards more accountability. Look at the last three areas on this slide. We're looking to, again, not look at just what happened in care, but on durable results. We're actually looking at 1 to 3 years later. This one says 6 to 12 months. We're moving to family-focused service delivery, and we're really focusing on permanency and for those youth who have no identified family members. So this is BBI's mission, and as you can see, it's really about collaboration and partnerships. Oftentimes in the past, residential has been kind of like out there away from systems of care, and residential should be part of systems of care. and really focused, as I said a minute ago, on practices that are consistent with their research on sustained positive outcomes. We would like to invite everybody to go to our website and endorse our BBI joint resolution. And the reason we'd like for you to do that is because then you're going to receive new documents that BBI is developing. So, for instance, within the next 2 weeks, there's going to be a wonderful new document coming out about efficacy and how do you transform to a short-term residential program. There's another document that will be coming out in the next month or so related to wraparound services in residential. And one of our colleagues who's on the phone really was the co-author of that, Kelly Pipkins-Burt, and is a wraparound trainer herself. So one of the reasons we want you to go to to endorse the joint resolution, which is really like endorsing system of care principles, is because then you will be up there in receiving these documents, and you don't have to keep going back to our website to check it. We'll probably have 5 new documents come out this year. We also have a document on working with adoptive families that's going to be coming out probably in the next couple months. The other thing, you'll be the first to be invited to BBI training events. We're having our second national event on October 4th through 6th in Andover, Massachusetts. And if you want to learn more about that, you really need to endorse the joint resolution or go to our BBI website and keep checking it. So that's why we want you to do it, so the documents we develop to support you, you have easy access to. Within our joint resolution, you'll find, again, the principles of BBI, which are very consistent with the principles of systems of care. But families and youth had a major role in every word that went into the joint resolution. And for them, they want to eliminate the use of all coercive interventions. And so for them, it's not just about reducing restraints, which I know anybody involved in residential has been involved in. They really want to go to the eliminate word. They say it's not an evidence-based practice. In fact, if you're using restraint and seclusion with any youth at all, it's actually contraindicated. There's much research about the contraindications, both for those who have been traumatized and those who have any kind of potential physical issues. And there is now an evidence-based practice, 6 core strategies that really can support people on their journeys. And the reason I spend time on this issue is that if, in fact, you're a residential program that has not had the benefit and support of training to support you in that journey to reduce and eventually get to that near elimination piece, if not elimination, then you're really spending a lot of time that you're not able to spend on the practices we're going to be talking about today. So it's important not only because families and youth tell us it's important, but it's important because it will reduce not only the anxiety in your organization, but the acuity so that you can really work differently with youth and families. Anybody interested in that, please go to the University of Maryland's website, and maybe Gary can type in how they can listen to that youth-guided webinar that really highlighted a program, Youth Development Institute in Arizona, who has nearly eliminated restraint seclusion, and learn about their journey. So when you go to our website, you're going to find these documents to not only just support if it's a residential program, if it's a community program, but look at the one guide for judges too. Sometimes we find that judges are committing you to residential for long periods of time. So it's a guide for judges on best practices in residential that we did with the Association for Children's Residential Centers. And you'll see many other types of documents that are there. So we develop these documents for you. They're part and parcel of BBI to support you all in moving forward. Many programs have little study groups, or as part of their staff supervision, they have them read something like, say, the second to the last one here in Efficacy, written by families. Have all the staff read it, and then they discuss it, or promoting youth engagement. These are documents written by and for by families and by youth for residential programs and their community counterparts. We also have free CEUs for everybody. A number of residential programs are having all of their staff, even their housekeepers, listen to each one of these, even if they don't qualify for a CEU, just so they can get steeped in what is best practice in residential. Once again, we used to think about residential as the child's going to get better in care. We're going to treat the child. He or she has problems, and he or she's going to get better. And does not correlate to sustained positive outcomes for the youth we're serving. So moving further along, one last bit is our 2014 book, and we highly suggest that you order this book. We're actually working towards, the publishers asked us, because it was such a successful book, to do part 2, so we're in the process of submitting part 2. But it really outlines many best practices. It gives you all of the references from all of the different areas we'll be talking about today. So with that, the BBI core principles are listed here. We've done the most work to date on family-driven and youth-guided, although when you think about culture and linguistic competence, we're really focusing on that. We're going to be having a racial disparities informational document released probably by the end of the summer. And we have 3 of our programs, the CEU web-based programs, are actually dedicated to how do you really focus on cultural and linguistic competence within a residential program. So we invite you to go to view those, but know that these principles are what drive everything that we do, and this is what we really try to maintain integrity against these principles. So if you want to look at the research on efficacy of residential, you want to look at a couple of things. One is that in one state, which we won't name, in 2009, they tracked all of the youth who actually were discharged from residential in their state in 2009, and they found that 68% of them were back in out-of-home care within 1 year of discharge versus Daymar Services, which is a BBI implementer in Indiana, which tracks their outcome data 3 to 5 years post-discharge, and their recidivism rate, BBI now calls it readmission, but they call it recidivism, and that includes even hospitalizations, is 3 to 15%. The other thing that we know that length of stay matters, if you look at the research on efficacy in residential, we know that length of stay matters under 6 months. John Lyons, which many of you are familiar with the CANS, he's now at the University of Chicago, Chapin Hall. He's done a lot of work on length of stay, and what he basically finds is that after 6 months, any kind of gains youth made actually begin to go downhill. New York State did a study and found after 9 months, youth actually got worse. What this bullet talks about, though, under length of stay is that New York State about, I don't know, it's more than 12 years ago, they hired what they called transitional coordinators because they found that they had very long lengths of stay, like we're talking about 2 years or so. And it took them 12-plus years to actually get down to, I believe it's currently approximately 14 months average length of stay. And what they did, though, is that they housed those transitional coordinators in the residential program. And so what happened is that when you're housed in a residential program, you have to start going to lots of meetings within the residential program. You have to, you start becoming easier to do discharge support groups rather than working with individual youth in their homes and communities on their individual discharge needs. And you start calling families or having them come to the program. Florida decided, and this was a number of years ago, to begin to reduce length of stay, and they also decided to hire something called like transitional coordinators. That might not be the exact name, and they actually put them in the community. And if you're in the community, what do? You work with the family, you work with the community agencies, the education that's going to support the youth, and they were able to reduce it in 3 years to under 6 months. If you wanted just a summary of the research, again, if you want to go to our book, you can look at, there's lots of research cited. But if you want just a real summary of what it says about if you want residential efficacy, what you want to know is shorter length of stay, again, under 6 months, and many of the programs who have achieved under 6 months, and again, this document that is our BBI guide on short-term residential, which will be out by mid-June, we're finding people getting to 3 months, getting to 60 days. So, and then family. If you want to really focus on long-term outcomes and not just youth getting better in care, which doesn't correlate to sustained positive outcomes post-discharge, It's family, family, family. What you'll see in the short-term guide is that actually they kind of reverse, is they're spending more time with families almost than they're just spending with youth alone in the program. And then, of course, the stability and support in the post-residential environment are critical too. So BBI is happening across the country. Some of them have been large, comprehensive state initiatives. Some state-level activities have currently underway and just beginning. Many provider organizations have been phenomenal in making different improvements, and also county and city level initiatives. So, for example, in New Hampshire, when they started their BBI initiative, there was a program called NFI Davenport, which is still around, and what they decided to do is that they decided to openly and honestly examine every practice. What we tend to do when we've done practices for a long time is just think, oh, because we've done them, that they're effective. But they really were open in what they were doing, and they decided to open and honestly examine those practices. They had family groups, they had youth groups, they had staff input, and they began to focus on, is this practice family-driven? Is this practice youth-guided? In some of the other New Hampshire programs, they actually immediately after doing the BBI training moved their clinical staff to working in the communities. They really began to integrate residential and community programming better. So this is just a kind of an NFI North contact in what they did. And after each one of these examples, you're going to see actually the contact information for everybody. So Massachusetts was our first state in the country and to decide to rebid every residential program's contract in child welfare and in mental health. So they rebid every against BBI practices, and they had this big kind of welcome to this initiative overview about this rebidding process, where they use the BBI framework, the practices. And Angela McLean, many of you might have heard of him. He was the Commissioner of Child Welfare in Massachusetts at the time. He's this commanding presence. There's 350-plus people, the leaders from every residential program in child welfare and mental health across the state. And he's up there on stage, and he has everybody mesmerized, and he discloses that he actually was raised partially in a residential program. He spent a number of years there. And when he talked about it, he said that, this program, which was Cal Farley's in Texas, which I have been connected with them in the last couple of years, and if they're on the phone, kudos to you, Cal Farley's. You're doing some good work down there. But when they were, when he was the Commissioner of Child Welfare, Cal Farley's called him, and they wanted to give him the second award. They'd been in business for over 100 years, what they called the prestigious Alumni Award, only the second one that was given. And when he went back, they had actually brought back some of the other former youth who he had been friends with during those 4+ years that he was at Cal Farley's. And when he was receiving this award, those other youth were there, and the old teachers were there, the old soccer coach was there. And he said after the award ceremony, he and 10 of his other former youth friends who were in care went out to dinner together. So any of you who are on this line, I'm sure all of you remember your high school years, because back then, of course, people were keeping youth for 3 years, 4 years, 5 years in residential. But all of us, most of us, when we think about, getting together with former high school, you might laugh about this or laugh about that. And he says, we did, even though we were in residential, we had lots of hijinks together. We had a lot of, fun. But he says the first question one former youth said to another former youth when we all got to dinner together with nobody but us was, did you ever find your mother? And he said the entire night, the only conversation we had was that everybody but one had not only found but reconnected with their family, and the one who hadn't created family. And he said to this 350-plus people who were in the room that day, really introducing this entire new rebidding process where people are going to be expected for the first time in 150 years to do things totally different in residential in Massachusetts. he said to everybody, and I don't think there was a dry eye in the house after he told this story, he says, the most important thing you can do in residential is find, engage, and support family members. And that's really what the framework is for Massachusetts. You can see there's other things. They're hiring 300-plus family and peer mentors. They have very flexible services where they're following into the community. They had already done tremendous work on reducing restraint and seclusion. And so it's just been an interesting process for them. One of the programs in Massachusetts is called the Plummer Home for Boys. And you see their kind of vision statement back in 2009 and now in 2015. And so what happened is James Lister was the CEO, is hired as the CEO there. And when he was hired, he was like, oh, let's make some improvements to this program. This is as he has shared this story. And he wanted, to make sure he had new furniture and cleaned everything up and paints and got clinical staff and trained in different types of therapies and evidence-based and real focus on all of those things that were going to happen internal to residential. And what he found is better programming did not equal better long-term outcomes. They were able to track their youth, and they found that what they needed to do is they needed to find family for everybody. This was a child welfare program. Many of them were discharged without identified family. So they put their primary focus now on permanency, on family search and engage, and parenting support and education, and building that community support network. And now they're finding the outcomes that they want. So contact information there. California kind of preceded everybody in this residential reform process. They spent a good 4 years in researching what's effective in residential, what is not effective, how do we move forward. And they really understood that they needed to move from long-term congregate care and treatment to short-term stabilization with follow-along community-based services, right from the Walters and Petra article, if you look at it. In L.A. County, which was one of 4 pilot projects, I really like how they kind of framed a vision, what great language they use of creating a strength-based, family-centered, needs-driven system of care that really transforms residential from long-term to short-term. They have done a particularly good job, and kudos to Michael Russo and his crew out there on the child welfare side, of actually significantly reducing out-of-home care in congregate care for youth under 12 years old. They have, in L.A. County, I think 10, 11, or 12 kind of community districts for child welfare, very large. As you can imagine, L.A. County, huge. And for the first time in, again, like 100 years or something, they had 3 of their most challenging districts where they didn't have one youth under 12 in congregate care. So pretty impressive information. These are kind of some of the key elements of the practice model for the California initiative. And it's interesting, they really try to focus on wraparound. It's not always wraparound to fidelity, although they'd like to have that, but they do focus on a wraparound approach. All of them are using family finding or family search and engage from day one. That means if you have identified youth with not a family member who can take them back or no identified family, the most important thing, the most urgent thing you can do is to find family. It's not about identifying the child's problem behaviors. It's not about finding out what groups he's going to be in or she's going to be in. It's finding family and building those lifelong connections. Mark Courtney, who's also with Chapin Hall, and is just kind of like the king of outcomes for youth who have been touched by residential, what he has found is that the support network that a youth has at discharge determines their success 10 to 15 years later. So it's kind of a reframe of what is residential. And for California reform, it's these things. It's family finding, building lifelong connections, and wraparound. And there's some really important studies from this California residential-based services. That's RBS study findings of the 4 pilots. You can see them here. And I hope that all of you go back and read some of these to your significant others tonight, because some of them are so important. Look at your chance of achieving permanency, which is the most important thing we want for every youth, to be raised with a family, somebody who loves them in a safe environment in the community, it decreases by 84% with each additional placement. So what we know now also in residential is that there has to be an urgency that this is the last congregate care placement this youth will ever have. If any of you run residential, we can no longer accept a youth and then say, oh, it didn't work. We have to ensure that every youth we accept that we're going to find permanency and we're not going to refer that youth, or he or she's not going to be, discharged from us and then a year later go to another residential program. So we're finding this is very important. In fact, in the first cohort of youth that were discharged from the California RBS pilots, the executive directors of the residential programs got together, and the outcomes were pretty good. But they got together and said, this is what we can do better. We didn't have enough urgency, that our staff were still too traditional. They would still say, oh, we have to go, take the kids on Friday nights to bowling. We've always done that. Well, Friday nights, they should be home. They should be with family. They should be in the community. If they don't have an identified mom, where's the grandma? Where's the godmother? Where's the uncle that they can be with until we find that permanent placement for them, permanency. And as we found in New Hampshire, they found the leadership found is that we weren't focused enough on supporting child welfare and probation to have the same values and same practices. So we would be sending a youth, wanting the youth to be home every weekend, say, and then the probation officer would have this old school approach. No, you can't do that. So we have to work with child welfare and probation and the judges and educate them. And what they found is that, and this goes back to what I was just saying a minute ago, if a youth left RBS, had finished the program, and they had had a previous placements of 6.55, average of 6.55, they were able to really meet with success. But once youth had 10 over 10, it was actually 10.18 previous placements, then the chance of permanency, the chance of success really went down. So once again, as the former commissioner of New York State Office of Mental Health said when New York City started their Building Bridges initiative, she said to them, every single day counts. We can no longer just say, I'll call that mom tomorrow or I'll do this next week. Every day counts in terms of working in the community. Here's Seneca Family of Services, one of the many organizations in California that really helped all of us learn how to do better work. And they started with who's your loneliest child and really started one child at a time in terms of finding permanency. And they have an absolute total commitment that families take care of children best. In fact, our own Kelly Pickens-Bird, who's a BBI consultant, is doing some work on, how do we pay for youth going home frequently who live long distances away from the residential program. How do different organizations pay for that? And she interviewed Jeremy Cahobrand, who's the head of Children's Village, which we'll talk about in a minute. And he said, the issue isn't how you pay it. The issue is your mindset. Do you believe this is important? If you believe this is important, then you're going to make it happen. So this is their mindset. And basically, the practice model for Seneca is family finding and wraparound. That's the practice model. And they might have a youth come in to their highest level of congregate care, and he or she is actually in the community within 4 days, meaning like discharge to the community because they've identified through wraparound such a strong family or strong supported network that he or she actually did not need residential. So this is just a brief overview for all of you. If you want more about BBI and all of the best practices, and we really encourage you to come to our October BBI training event or read our book or, go to our website and learn more there. Children's Village, I just mentioned Jeremy Cahobrand. He's just done amazing work in transformation of his own residential, but also has had input across the country. And basically what he says, residential should be like an emergency room. You want to get in an emergency room and you want to get out. And if you're going to be outcomes driven, which he is, then you want to focus on very short, like 21-day, 28-day, 40-day, 100-day residential models. They have done some very interesting work with their program, and what they were able to do is identify and secure flex funding through private donors for families, including the youth, 1 year for the first year post-residential discharge. But what they found out is that when they were using this, is that because they used data to inform practice, is that 15% of their highest risk families were actually consuming 75 to 85% of their aftercare resources. So using that data, they went to look at what's the evidence base for really working with families with so many different challenges, and they came up with multisystemic therapy. They used MST. You can see this was one of their first outcomes related to this, and since then they've expanded their MST team significantly and are continuing to find that. Look at this, the first time before they even were sophisticated at this, 70% of the youth and families using MST were able to remain together versus 20%. 20% were failed versus 70% in the comparison group. So MST had that 50% difference. So another program which I've mentioned is in Indiana, and Damar Services has also been a residential leader, transformational leader across the country. And all of you who work in residential community, you've all had to do incident reports at some point or another. You've done an incident report. Their most critical incident is that if a youth is not spending time with his or her family member and or engaged in an activity in his or her home community that matches his individual strengths, say might be choir, might be basketball, then it's a critical incident that goes up to the COO of the organization. And phone calls don't count. They made a conscious decision because they were using data to inform outcomes. Data to inform the outcomes. So they were looking at their long-term data, and they would continue to go back and use that data to say, analyze it, assess it, what could we do better? And what they realized is they did best when they could spend time with families every day. That means when the youth could spend time, when the staff could spend time. So they actually changed their business model, and they only serve families within a 30-mile radius. Now, I know many people can't do that, and we have in our family-driven care PowerPoint, what do you do when you have, families long distance, and we are supporting organizations in that. But really, if you really are focused on outcomes, you're going to focus on seeing and getting your staff home, into the youth's home multiple times weekly, if not, every day. I know in New Hampshire, Beckett Family of Services could not do 7 times a week getting youth home, so they actually committed to doing a minimum of twice a week, even if they had to drive 3 hours. And look what Damar also did. They couldn't get funding for their newfangled way of doing things, so they went to their funder and said, listen, if a youth requires readmission post-discharge, it's free. What if you guaranteed your own outcomes? And that's what we're moving towards, is guaranteed outcomes for the funders, as they're looking at that so we can have sustained positive outcomes. That changed everything, and in fact, it influenced how Indiana did business once they guaranteed their outcomes, and now organizations across Indiana are guaranteeing their outcomes. Damar is still doing 3 years post-discharge, and which includes hospitalizations, and others I think are required for 1 year. And this is their definition of recidivism, which again BBI calls readmission. So, and this is their outcome data. Sorry, somehow that slide got a little bit messed up, but they note, and they're transparent about their data. They note that their outcomes are not as robust. I don't have their 2016 data yet, as they were back in 2008, 2010. And so they have identified they assessed it, and they have identified some measures that are going to begin to address getting it back down to the lower level there. And I love this quote by Dr. Jim Dalton, who's the CEO of Damar. And what he says is, our job is not to cure kids, but really to help kids and families negotiate the basic task of everyday living. So it's not so much what we used to think, kind of the old school. It's about, let's remove those problems that child brought to care, but it's establishing conditions with the child and the family in their community to manage the symptoms and crisis more effectively. So it really fits well into the whole system of care framework. So as you can see, there are big steps being taken, small steps being taken. Lots of family-driven and youth-guided practices have been identified. People are sometimes, residential programs, community programs, are just using BBI documents. They're holding regional or statewide forums. A number of states are involved in rewriting their regulations, their licensing, putting out new RFPs based on Building Bridges principles and practices. Many action plans being developed, and of course lots of focus on revising fiscal strategies. So you never change things, as Buckminster Fuller says, by fighting existing reality. To change it, we wanted to build this new model that makes the old model obsolete. And so here are a few examples of family-driven care practices. Our lovely Karen Ann Johnson, who is a family advocate in Queens, New York at SCO Family of Services, is going to share a little bit more about this. And again, if you could go to our website and download some of our documents, you'll find a lot about what are family-driven care practices. You can go to the FREDLA website or SAMHSA's website to listen to our family-driven care webinar. But really beginning to ask yourself, just like they did in New Hampshire, what are our practices? What's our mission? Many programs had to redo their mission and their values to put family-driven care as a primary focus. Do we really start our training by saying we're family-driven, that we're focused on engaging families, all families? We're going to, the research is pretty clear. If you're going to implement a best practice, an evidence-informed or an evidence-based, you have to have really great supervision against those practices. So what are we training our clinical staff? How are we training them to really engage families? There's really only two evidence-based practices, which is, three really: functional family therapy, MST, and motivational interviewing on engaging youth, and then translating that for motivational interviewing to, you can use it to engage families. Do you have a focus on permanency and youth family finding, or do you have family advocates? Do you have sibling support? Do you have clinical expertise in this area? So these are just, are families welcome 24/7, but do you really mostly focus on staff working with the families in their homes? And what are your rules around staff, youth contacting families frequently? So these are just a couple of examples, but what I'd like to do is now move and hand it over to you, Karen, if you can just start talking about how do you engage families.
Hi, everyone. How are you? I'm Karen Ann Johnson. I'm a family peer advocate with SCO, and I'm also the mom, very proud mom, of a special needs young adult. He is now a college grad, so he grew up. But at age 10, he had a diagnosis of Asperger's and major depression, and I had absolutely no idea what to do. I was so frustrated, and I felt backed into a wall, and I didn't know the first thing about how to find care and how to work with program providers and clinical people. It was really tough. So what I'm going to share today, and I hope that you come away with, are some concrete ideas and things that my family members, the family members I work with as an advocate, and frankly some things that I have observed and noticed of how I would like to have services provided to me. And in doing so, that would help me engage and get engaged and stay engaged, because that's just as important as the initial. So to start off, I mean, it's so important, as you might imagine, to have a rapport at the very onset. So I often say it's so important for families to feel like you've got them at hello, meaning you've made a connection, you have made an impression, and your organization and the folks in it, everyone knows who they are. They know that they're there for like a new admission, and everyone is welcoming. Everyone knows their name, and that helps. It's so important to have a family peer advocate available for the family member, and that family member and advocate really doesn't have to say anything, because what they're doing is supporting us with their presence. It's so comforting knowing that there's someone there who's gone through some of the same things that you're going through, and they're just there if you need them. it really makes a difference. It's, of course, really important in your first impressions to ask us what and how you'd like us to address you. Family members, as you might imagine, have all different presentations, but it's important to not just sort of be too familiar and or not be too distant. So asking just completely solves that. Most of the family members that I work with, and particularly me, I like to be talked to and have an invitation to engage. And I'm going to be very, very picky and granular about this, but shorter sentences with not a lot of talk and talk and talk, and this is what you need to do, and all of that, and the whole Megillah at the very beginning, because it's overwhelming. We're scared to death. We've been through this a number of times. There's just a ton of things going through our heads. So just keep it very simple and make sure that you're connecting with us, because we'll feel what your intentions are faster than the words that you're saying. And as you can imagine, which is the point of having an advocate, usually when you're traumatized or you have some stress going on, you don't really hear what people are saying, especially if they're like very, very long-winded and they have lots and lots of details. It's also important to have everything that you say to a family member in writing, but in those shorter and more direct language. And of course, it's very important to be able to speak to the family member in their preferred language first. And even if you are not at the very onset completely bilingual, it really makes a difference when you greet a family member in their own language. I have spoken with a lot of my peers and that are also family advocates, and I make an effort to speak in Spanish, and I make an effort to speak there's an Arabic, and to give addresses and shalom and whatever the culture is. It's just that those first, really concrete welcomes. It's important for you guys to know that the kids, our children, are terrifying, especially when they're in, a discontrolled or a trauma loop, and they have trashed homes and, hurt us, and we're pretty terrified. A lot of family members, including myself, felt that once our children got into care, then the program's going to fix them, because that's what programs do. Oh, no. We all know that that doesn't happen. So it's important for program members, program providers, to acknowledge our fears, but remind us also that our child or our children belong to us. It's important to have a perspective to say, we're going to help you and give you some skills and tools to help your child stay safe and stable in your home as best as we can and within your child's limits. However, your child belongs to you. We're just giving you a hand right now. And feeling that partnership and making sure that families know that they are still the mama, still the daddy, and all of the other connections is so important. I will come back to the skills and tools part, because that's, the important takeaway. It's really important that if your direct care staff are using very specific engagement techniques with our kids, helping de-escalate, helping recognizing triggers and things, we don't know that language. We don't know how that goes generally. We try to do the best we can, or frankly just, give in and give them everything they want, which is sometimes not the best thing. So it's important that if there are very specific methods and behavior management methods that your staff is using, I would so encourage you to ask your staff or have them trained and work with, hand in hand, a family advocate to pass those skills along, because it really is a partnership, and it really makes a difference when a staff member will sit and have a conversation with you about your child. I mean, in a just a give and take. It is so fruitful. Family members, as you might imagine, we present with a multitude of expressions. So we can be traumatized. We can come in swearing and cursing. We can be completely humiliated. There's some shame. There's a lot of denial. And guilt. Guilt is the biggest one. Our kids, they know how to manipulate us, and I suspect they'll learn how to manipulate you guys. But help us help our children, and that's something that I'm going to come back to. Meet us where we are. If our family members and myself, if we present as super teary, very vulnerable, just stop everything and just speak slowly, look in our eyes and make that connection, and just, continue to explain exactly what you can do to help us, and that we're not alone. We are not alone. It's important to know that the fear is so tangible when our child is out of control and has been hospitalized for trashing and doing these terrible things. And the very first thing you say is, well, we want your child to go right back home, but you have to tell me how and why. You have to help me know that it's going to be safe. You have to give me back my power to manage my child, as within safety limits and as long as it's possible. And if it's not for a period of time that intensive therapy is needed, just help us and show us how to stay connected. And a family advocate very handily does that by modeling, by, supporting visits, by having, birthday cards reminding family members to just keep the child on the top of their head and their hearts. So those things are very important. It's important to tell us what you expect, that you, again, are family-focused and strength-based, but it's important for you to tell us what you expect of us. If you let us, we will run, and not pick up the phone. It's the truth, because a lot of us feel that an initial placement is a respite. Now I can breathe. Now I can put my house back together. Now I can just take a load off. Give us the courtesy of saying, I know it's been tough, but you have to come back and know that we recognize you needed that little bit of a time, but come back here to do some good engagement work and some good connecting with us, with your child, so that we're all together and we surround your child with, a really strong connection. It's important to give us schedules of meetings, be willing to agree to meet us in our communities. That's where we live. If you have connections, or your advocate has connections at the local Y or at local resource centers or other recreational spaces where you can just meet a family member, sometimes just for coffee, go and meet in the community. If our family members or if we invite you to our homes, come and be willing to stay. And we'll make it as comfortable as possible, but we prefer you to say no, to offer. I'll meet you in your home. I can be in your neighborhood within an hour or however. And it's important for them to see not just the clinical team, but the behavior support staff there. It's important for them to see the direct care staff there. It's important to see, if they can, an entire team. In a dream world, I'd love for every family member to have their own treatment team that follows them and their child wherever they go for the length of the stay. That's not always possible, but it is something that is just, makes us feel less fearful, less apprehensive about the future. And again, the hardest thing to deal with when we contemplate having our children, reunite and come back home, is that it's going to be just the way it was before, and nothing's changed. So I can't say again. I'm sort of circling back to the skills and tools to help us learn how to manage our children safely. And a lot of the skills are new, but continue to encourage us. Don't give up. Be patient. We're going to give you a run for your money because that's what we do. But we really have, obviously, the love and the heart to do it, and we just need you to believe in us. If your program is the last place our child has to be out of home at, that would be a dream. We've talked to so many people and so many clinicians in different places. We're looking for you to be the program that we have not had yet. And we're looking for those connections. Every single thing that you say to us can make a difference. I have connections from previous caregivers for my son that remain close. And I'll never forget their words. They were words of kindness, words that were very frank, words that were demanding. Everything that I was able to learn, I retained. And I'm just pleased as punch to be able to give it back. And essentially, I've created in myself the family advocate that I did not have. So that's what I wanted to share.
Well, Karen, thank you so much. If one of my dreams is that we have a Karen Ann Johnson in every single residential program across the country, in fact, multiple ones. I know some of the California programs have 14, 20, 30 family advocates. So, and I think when you talked about your dream world, that's the new best practice framework. If you're going to, when our new guide comes out on short-term residential, you're going to find that's exactly, your dream world is the framework that residential programs across the country who have leaders who have been transformative have created. So thank you so very much. Just wonderful, wonderful. And I want to encourage everybody, we have a chat section, as Gary talked about. Please start putting your questions down because we're going to have opportunity for questions as we move on. And then we're going to say a few words about youth-guided care, kind of the same things that we talked about family-driven. Review your practices. Do you have youth advocates? Do you really have a meaningful youth advisory council? Listen to our webinar on youth-guided care. And really what we know is that family-driven care and youth-guided care both really interface with trauma-informed care. And when we think about youth-guided and what do youth need to be successful long-term, because it's like if a youth has diabetes, he or she's going to have to manage that his or her whole life. And if they have past histories of trauma or if they have behavioral and emotional challenges of any sort, they're going to have some different strategies, as Karen talked about, to manage that. So what we want all of our staff to know, if they know about youth-guided, is to know about trauma too, and not just evidence-based trauma models that were evidenced in community programs, but everyday kind of understanding. We want to move from intentional models to neurobiological models to be able to have distress tolerance, to really regulate your emotions, is our birthright for all of our children, and many of them have lost it, and that's why they're with us. And so really moving in that direction, knowing that things like points and level systems and standardized behavior management approaches across the entire program, or across the youth in the program, again, are not only not effective, they're contraindicated. If you look at some of the literature for youth with trauma histories, youth with attentional issues, youth with emotional challenges, standardized behavior management approaches are actually contraindicated. So we want to even move away from just the use of just praise to things like compassionate inquiry, courtesy of Dr. Janina Fisher, who's a protege of Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, where what we want to do with youth, and Katie's going to move into this now, is we want to really focus on voice and choice. And so instead of when a youth says something like, helps Leroy when Leroy dropped his books, instead of us saying, oh, you're such a nice person, or, oh, look at you, you got, look at you, Amanda, you got a, 85 on chemistry, that's great. We want to develop their voice. We know with trauma that the broca's area of the brain responsible for speech actually atrophies. When people have had traumatic experiences, and if they're triggered by trauma. So what we want to do is throughout the entire time that youth is receiving a residential intervention or any kind of community intervention, we want to focus on really building their voice and choice so that muscle gets strong. So instead of us just praising somebody, our first interaction with every youth before praise within the residential, within the family, should be, what do you think about that picture you just drew? What do you think about the kind of, how do you use color? And then after they use their voice and choice, voice for that, then we say, wow, I think that you just have an unbelievable eye for color, very artistic. Or I think that, what do you think about who you are as a person, that you were the first person to help Leroy when he dropped his books? So asking that question first and then using that compassionate inquiry and then moving to say, well, I think you're just the kindest person I know. And so with that, we're going to now move to Katie. And Katie, you're going to talk to us a little bit about how do you engage youth?
Hi, everybody. So my name is Katie Rushlow, and I'm a longtime youth advocate now. Currently, I'm 27 years old, so I've been out of the, kind of aged out of the child welfare and that kind of arena systematically in a way, but I've still been very involved in advocating for youth rights and for youth-guided care pretty much since the day I went into care. So that's basically about 13 years now. And I really have a lot to say about youth-guided care. Beth would definitely know that too. But I first want to really kind of share a little bit about myself and kind of what helped me personally so that, just to give a little underlying view of what really youth engagement really can mean for somebody later. So I'm 27 now, and although I am very much managing my mental health and I am quote-unquote successful, it wasn't always easy, and I've had a lot of challenges in my life, but some things that have helped along the way are that I've only had one placement. And like Beth says, with each placement, that decreases by 84% chance. The chance of permanency decreases. So that helped tremendously. And another thing that really, really helped is I had somebody who really, truly cared and believed in me. A provider who didn't have to, who always made sure that I had what I needed, that I was given the skills that I needed. She's been a huge part of my life, even now, been to every birthday party, my graduation, my college graduation, my baby shower. She'll be at my son's first birthday. And she was never paid for those. She just saw something in me and just believed in me, and that really, truly helped. Of course, I've had other people who also believed and cared for me along the way, but having that one consistent person who didn't even have to really reach out in such a way really impacted my life for the better. And then voice and choice, like Beth said, that really had a big part in my life. Pretty much from the first time I went into placement, I'm very outspoken, and I always said things that I didn't like or did like. So I was introduced to an advisory team, and that really got me going. That really got me voicing what I needed, and it really got me excited about helping other youth and getting them what they needed. And here I am still on this 13, 14-year journey from that. One of my favorite quotes I've ever heard was, "There's healing in helping." And that's so personal to me, and I really would like to say, when you think about reaching out and engaging youth, they have so much valuable input that you can use in your programs that will help other youth, and it will help them in the process. I know personally it has helped me in my personal journey. So let us help it. If you think common companies and other, businesses, they reach out to their consumers for their feedback. And so that's what we really should be thinking about, families and youth, really reaching out to the people that you're providing services to and having them using their input to help your services. So youth-guided care really means that young people have the right to be empowered and educated in decision-making roles in their lives, as well as the services that they're receiving. So not just in their success plans, but also really bringing youth to the table and really valuing what they have to say and using it. So some examples of that, which I'll get into later when I talk about some strategies, would be to have a meaningful youth advisory council who meets, every 2 weeks, every month, or however often they need, and bring those issues and ideas that they come up with really to staff development meetings and really to the table so that they can incorporate the changes that they need to be successful within your program. So just a little bit about some more youth-guided care before I get more into the strategies. Really, it should be really individualized success plans. When I was in placement, it wasn't this individualized. Everybody pretty much had the same plan and the same goals, and everybody had to do everything the same way, and it was very by the books. And nobody is the same, so we really need to start thinking about individualizing success plans and individualizing goals. And closeness to home, like everybody's been saying throughout this presentation, that's so important. Residential is not a home. Youth do not deserve or should not be growing up in a residential. And especially being so young and being so many hours away and only seeing your family once a week, once a month, once a quarter, really is so traumatizing when you're supposed to seeing them every day. And when we're talking about family, it's important for the youth that you include those siblings, and not only include siblings, but let us establish our own supports and our own network of people who are able to help us, who aren't just in our immediate family. I know a lot of times there's restrictions on who you can talk to outside of the residential, outside of their families, and who they can see. And sometimes it may be a family friend that they find supportive. It may be a friend of, like a parent of their friend that they find supportive. So let us identify some supportive people who are appropriate to help us along this journey. And allow us to stay connected to our home community. I can tell you that one thing that did not help me when I was in placement, not being able to be around my same friends and being asked all these questions about where are you and where were you and what happened, and not being able to be at my best friends and my like, big birthday parties, being just involved in my own home community was really something that really impacted my life in a negative way, and I still have problems with that years later. And include advocates, just like Karen said. Family advocates can be so beneficial, and so can youth advocates, especially if a youth has been discharged or has had the experience of being in a residential, maybe possibly your own residential. That could really increase the success of the youth, having somebody they can relate to, and that's something that I wish I had as well. And then another thing I'd like to share is really the vibes that the staff give off. It's really hard to be receptive of wanting to receive help from somebody who kind of just is like, just there, that they just kind of seem like they're there for the job and just kind of there to enforce the rules. And we really need to see that, the staff is really there to help us and to really help us learn the skills that we need to be successful and really care about us and really just be a part of our lives rather than, there for a job. So just to get into some strategies on how you can engage youth, there's always youth advisory councils. Those are so meaningful. You have it, like I said, meet a few times a week, and having them bring that their voice to the bigger tables. And engaging youth right from the start, even before they enter their homes, enter the residential. So there's a lot of youth when I did a focus group a couple of times who really didn't even know they were going to residential before. And the things that they had to say that were really hard to hear. And so many of them said, if I would have known, I would have been so much, I would have been so difficult when I have gotten here. So really engaging youth right from the start helps. And then having them be involved in your program as well. Like I said, I did a focus group. That's a great way to get information from your youth. And having youth as advocates while they're in placement and do things having youth be involved in your programs in other ways, like having them help in environmental design. If you want to create a quiet space or create a safe side or something, have youth help create those spaces. Have them give tours or just give tours to youth and family who are visiting the facility. Have them greet people when they come in the door. Just have them be involved and feel valued, and not just like they're there because they are damaged or sick or because they can't be home because they're dangerous. Like Karen Ann said, there's a lot of guilt on parents when a child enters residential, and there's a lot of guilt on the child too. So, really understanding the trauma behind that is so important too. And just really engaging them from the start, during, and definitely after. And just, like I said, the things that help me, I think are really also good factors that you should take into consideration. And I think that's all I have to.
Well, Katie, thank you so very much. I know I
kind of ramble sometimes.
I know I've been mesmerized at times when Katie has spoken and in large groups when she's talked about how difficult it was for her when she couldn't even be there when her brother had his first date or when her sister was going to the prom, that she missed all those family experiences because it wasn't family driven and youth guided then. And you've just helped so many youth across the country because now Katie's working on a national level on engaging. So thank you so much for your focus on that. And I see that a number of people have written in a couple of things, people really appreciating the trauma piece, Kathleen talking about individual and strength-based, which is really what BBI is about too. And then Kimberly, I do want to also address your question. We're almost at questions. Just wanting to say just a couple of things, how important it is if you work for an oversight agency, a managed care company, or a system of care, is that you really think about how can we as oversight agencies, or how can you as oversight agencies or licensing, or how can you begin to support better outcomes for youth and families, because that's what we're looking for, long-term outcomes. And so really focusing on permanency, family finding, we've said this multiple times, it's probably the most urgent thing for us to do in residential or with the youth in residential. And that includes, an extensive array of focus. So, for instance, how about adoptive families? In one RTF in a state that has 18 youth, 13 of them are placed there by adoptive families today, as of today. And, this specialty needs on supporting those families. And then, of course, using the child and family team or family team conferencing. So, as Katie said, youth have their voice, family have their voice. Flexible fiscal models, we find that's very important, although, as Jeremy Goldbrand said, you can actually do this just by having the commitment. then funding and training for clinical staff so that they have these family engagement practices that are really best practices, and they're supervised towards those, because otherwise what happens is that they're new clinical staff coming out of school, coming out of graduate school, and not really having a best practice or evidence-based practice approach for engaging families. And so what happens is that residential programs start blaming families and start, actually degrading families because we don't have the skills or a mindset or a practice model to support them. We at BBI strongly believe in family and youth advocates who can follow youth in and out, such as in Massachusetts. In Massachusetts, the family and youth advocates are placed in the family group programs in the community, and they follow families and youth in residential, and they're there after residential. So these are just different areas for you all to consider about what you can do. And now I'd like to go to questions and answers, and we're going to be, because there's, almost 200 people, we're going to just really focus on the chat box. Is that correct, Gary? We're just going to have people put them in chats.
Yes.
Okay. So Kimberly, you asked a wonderful question. It's on the chat box. I think everybody can see it. Is how do we mitigate multiple placements for CSEC youth who have complex trauma? So where does BBI and Youth Voice fit in? So I'll start first, and Casey, you might want to add something to that. So when we talk about, about voice and choice, there's this simple voice and choice, such as when a youth comes in and you say to the youth and family, like, what time do you like to go to bed at night? We don't have standardized bedtimes here. We do have to ensure that every single youth has at least 8 hours or 9 hours, whatever it is, depending on their age, or 10 hours, depending on their age, although we're really hoping that people know how particularly just hard it is for youth under 12 years old, because if they're in a program, residential program under 12, that means there's a likelihood they're going to be in another residential program in their life. And so we really want to try to prevent that to begin with. But so if you are looking at voice and choice, you don't say you can go to bed at 1 o'clock in the morning, but you have to be up by 6. We have to say you can choose your bedtime, but we have to ensure that you're up in time for school and that you have at least 8 hours. So it's always safety first, safety first. So for instance, what many residential programs are doing right now is they're giving youth cell phones when they come in. They're cell phones that don't have video capability or don't have camera capability, and the only people they can call are youth, their friends, on the approved list, but they had input into that unless there was a real reason why a youth should not be in there because of a court issue. They do get to have, youth that their friends on there, and of course their family and extended family and cousins and are encouraged to call them, and they give, they maybe hand them in during school and hand them in during when they go to bed at night. But for some youth, maybe they do need their phone by their bed because they need to call somebody in the middle of the night sometimes, and so there's individual issues. So there is a safety mechanism if necessary for youth voice, and that's why, Kimberly, I'm preceding that. And so depending on the program, I know that, there's different program models for youth and different program practices for youth who have been exploited. And we really need to be very careful that they're not in a place where they can be easily exploited, because as you know, in 2 seconds, they're finds out where they are. And so that's a very unique situation where how do we keep those youth connected to community, to their family, when they're in a very unsafe place. And so I think that's an individualized approach with that family and with that youth. And those might be one of the rare situations where you're not, say, putting a youth in downtown Philadelphia because that's where she was exploited. So you might be, or he, deciding that you're actually going to have a period of time where you're going to have a youth further away, but really work out, making sure that he or she still sees his or her family. So you brought up a really key piece, and it's always safety first, but what we tend to do is think we're erring on safety when we're erring on just old ways of doing things. But in the situation you brought up, I think we have to be very careful. So I don't know, Katie, if you saw that, how do we mitigate multiple placements for CSEC, and if you had any other comments on that for these, poor young men and women or even children who have, this have really been exploited, and we have to keep them safe.
I mean, like you said, the safety first is important, obviously, number one, but still, like, just asking them what would help them, and like you said, individualized, and asking for their feedback, either during the time that they're in placement or even after they're in placement when they are safe enough to go back to the community or their families. Really reaching out and using their voice to try to help maybe the other youth that are being exploited or who are in programs for being exploited. I think that's pretty much everything else I would have said is what Beth said.
You have another question. This is from Carlene, who is a absolutely wonderful residential leader in Rhode Island at St. Mary's and has just done such wonderful transformation and partnering with family support organization in her state. But she asked you, Katie, what are your thoughts about youth in care having access to social media and cell phones? And remember, I already answered, which is a solution that is happening in different states where they actually have cell phones, but they're limited. So you could actually answer for Carlene.
Like Beth said, I agree about the cell phone use, how some states are doing that now. Maybe not, like Beth said, maybe not their own cell phone because of the camera and the videoing and, different things like that. But being able to have that safety net that you can call whoever you want, as long as it's not a core issue, when you want, and just to know that, you don't have to, there's one phone for, 40 youth and, have, 10 minutes on the phone. I remember only having a half-hour phone on the day, and that was, like, really not very cool to me. What I think about the social media, that's really a kind of touchy subject. As much as I would like to say that youth should have access, I don't personally think maybe they should have access because it can be kind of triggering. There's a lot of bullying on social media, although there are controls and parental controls and things, there's not really much you can do to monitor like you could giving them a limited cell phone. Maybe certain social medias, maybe, I don't know, like maybe Snapchat, but I wouldn't go as far as like Facebook and Instagram and stuff. There's a lot of triggering things, especially on Instagram, especially for youth, is suicidal, or they have a problem with bully at school. That's, I think, really a big issue right now is the cyberbullying. So in my personal opinion, if you would have asked me years ago, I would have said, yes, we should have access to social media. But now, as an advocate, and because I think safety first too, I don't think social media is really maybe a safe thing right now.
So thank you for that. And I know that, again, some programs related to social media are doing what Katie said, which is just a limited social media and doing lots of education and learning about bullying and about, how to use it in a way, especially if you're teaching youth what their triggers and what are their warning signs and what are strategies that really help them and what are strategies that don't help them. And so I think that we do need, Carlene, you brought up a great question, we do need a lot of education around that because we all know 2 minutes after they walk out our doors, they're going to be using social media. So what can we do during our time? So thanks for that. And thank you, Michael Orth, who isn't Michael Orth, but who's Andy Bell, talking about trauma and how important it is for the long term. And Mary Bunch, you ask also one of the key questions, which is, and as much as I talk about family-driven, 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 as kind of looking at the outcome and youth guidance, if you really look at the research on long-term outcomes for our children, the most important variable is high school education, is them completing high school. And so that's even more important than family in terms of any of our youth, not just youth in residential. So not, a residential framework model, which is those 3 by Walters and Petra, which is family, short-term, and support in the community. So basically, yes, those programs that are transforming the way they do education also. And I think it's interesting, Mary, that you pinpoint an issue that youth across the country say on panel after panel who have been in residential, that what can you improve? Education. That so the issue for many is they're trying to, even if they're in an art, and if you look at Mark Courtney's work, it's get youth into community education to begin with. And so if you're looking at some of the research on day treatment programs even now, they're not as actually robust outcomes as the ones of putting our clinical services in the schools. So what can you do from the very beginning to support that educational placement that youth is going to go home to if, in fact, he or she is not able to be in that placement right then and there with support from your program? So if we talked about DAMAR, their staff are in the schools with the youth. Their staff are going there, they're checking it out, they're working with the teachers, they're working with the local clinicians there to make sure their youth are successful there. So you pinpoint something extremely important, and if in fact they are in your RTC placement, then as Karen talked about, the strategies for the teachers, are we sure they have them? Do we not just drop that youth off, but in fact do we have this transition that might go 6 months that we're really supporting? YDI in Arizona started and had some really significant positive outcomes with what they call their BBI project, where they really are following the youth and the families for at least 6 months, up to a year post-discharge, supporting them wherever they are. So it's really doing not only the child welfare and probation and judges, but it's focusing on those educational settings and trying a different educational placement if, in fact, that one that the youth was going to go home to in their home community isn't going to work for him or her. So I know Delaware has done a lot of good work in this area where they're really focused on supporting the youth in their own educational settings. And if you want, Mary, you can email me and I can connect you with people who have done that work in Delaware. And so then Richard asked, has your BBI work been done in a jurisdictions where a core practice model is actively used, and have there been benefits or challenges or associated therewith? You are a very good writer, Richard. So when you say jurisdictions where core practice model, Richard, could you ask what you mean by a core practice model? I don't know if you're talking about, are you talking about, like, say, Wraparound Milwaukee, while Wraparound's being used? Or are you talking about a practice model within a residential, say they're using Ross Green's Collaborative and Proactive Solutions or Trauma Systems Therapy by Glenn Sachs? So just Richard, if you could type what you're talking about. And then Carlene, when you're writing, I can see your beautiful face and smile. So you talk about friendships. Many youth had friendships prior to being in care, lose their friendships, and develop new friendships with the youth in care. That's a really key piece. And one of the things that is done, I know there's a family member at a program in Long Island the youth was in care for 7 months, received residential, and she had tears in her eyes when she said during that time he lost every friend he had in his home community. And so what they've done in some of the residential programs, this particular residential program that listened to the family and changed practice based on family feedback and youth feedback, as Katie talked about, they actually, their rec therapist or their activity therapist don't do group activities anymore. So what they do is and there's more and more programs that are doing this, is that at admission or pre-admission, they're meeting with the family, they're meeting with the siblings, they're meeting with the youth. Who are their important friends that can maintain them? What are they engaged in the community with friends, or to build, pro-social peers in the community? And that activity therapist or rec therapist, their job is no longer group recreation for kids with behavioral and emotional challenges in the program, but keeping each youth connected. And in fact, at DAMAR, the research on having a pro-social peer is extremely robust. And so what they do is they make sure that one of the key things they do is every youth is engaged with pro-social peers, at least one pro-social peer. So there's different strategies, Carlene, that different programs utilize, but I found that one where you move your activity or rec people to really focusing on those friendships in the community, and usually that's through, like, activities that they have. It could be, as I said, it could be choir, it could be church, it could be, soccer team, it could be, whatever it is. So that's something. And then Carlene asked about, so that's one strategy, and you ask about dating and dating someone outside the program. I don't know, Katie, if you wanted to comment on dating. Everybody wanted to date Katie, I know that.
Yeah, actually I do. Well, I think, like, for that, the first thing I would do would be really to engage families on that and how they feel and what their rules about dating are. Are they allowed at the boyfriend or girlfriend's house? Are they allowed to go on a date? Things like that. And then from there, I mean, if there's visit times for families or friends to come at the residential or the community residence, then maybe a boyfriend or girlfriend could come visit just the same as a friend, and then, if they do have a relationship and they are able, to have, day passes or something to go out to dinner or something, to go to a movie or something. I know a lot more like community residents kind of have more of that flexibility. But like Beth said, with the rec person really being, individualized and going out to the community, I think fostering any relationship, whether it's dating or friendship, is important. So, I think we should, residential should do the best that they can to incorporate those special people in the youth lives. But obviously with engaging the family first.
Right. And also, Carlene, we know with these short-term models where we're moving to like 3 months and, definitely under 6 months, is that sometimes, you're not at that place, but you're working with the family and the youth together in the community when they're home to do something versus the youth having that happen from the program, that you're really making it a more normalized situation. Because if they're going to be dating the day they go home, then that becomes part of what they're doing there. So if a youth is dating someone outside of the program, they should be home on the weekends and maybe even during the week so that the family is involved in that dating oversight. It shouldn't be that they're dating from the program and the staff. And maybe I shouldn't say shouldn't, but that's what we want to be careful of. Okay, so James, thank you for your comment that you guys do this focus on safe and productive use of social media and Internet access. And if you want to, Carlene, and you want to connect to James, I think we can make that happen. Gary will let you know how. And thank you, Richard, for your your clarification. And yes, right, the child welfare framework for what you're talking about. So if you're looking at what we say in wraparound is, say, the child and family team, and child welfare, like, say, what Jeremy Cahalbrand uses is family team conferencing. And so I think that it's that BBI fits very well into child welfare's, practice model. But what you want to make sure is that there are, even when the state agency lead, the child welfare commissioner, is saying, yes, we're about, these kinds of practice models. Oftentimes, the core practice model, oftentimes the child welfare worker who's on the street, so to say, or the one that's in the office and working directly with the families and the youth, really hasn't understands the real practice elements of how those principles are operationalized. And so I would say, yes, I think that we can definitely, BBI can interface with whatever best practice, whether it's child welfare, juvenile justice, mental health, is working with. But I think you have to make sure that there's education and support of those workers. So overall, I would say, yes, there could be different issues that come up that we'd definitely be, willing to talk about. We have a whole kind of child welfare expertise that we utilize, that BBI utilizes. We have Child Welfare League of America is on our BBI board and also on our steering committee. So just really, if you have more specifics, you can email those later. And then Lynette Rivera talks about home-based therapists who are able to work within the schools and homes are well situated to create inclusion of all members in the family. I think it's important for information to be available to judges who make many of the decisions. Right. So, Lynette, you're absolutely right. That's kind of, I don't know if you're from Delaware, but that's definitely one of the things that I know that I've heard that Delaware is doing. And that's why we developed the Judges Guide, is because judges need to have this information too. So please download our Judges Guide from our website. I think it will really, really be helpful. And then we have, okay, so Kelly already told you that, and that we're having a whole website. And Richard said, thank you. Oh, right. California is doing that statewide integrated work, expanding on RBS. Yes, so let's follow up offline. So any other questions or comments? Just wonderful questions and comments from people. And I just want to really thank again Karen and Ann and Katie for representing Youth and Family Voice, and for all of you for being part of this. And everybody on the phone is doing some good work. So just a big thank you to each of you for the good work you do. And with that, I guess if anybody has any more, they can email us. Our emails are available on the PowerPoint. Here's Karen and Katie's, and here's mine, and Kelly, who's also been helping out and doing such a good job. So, okay, so thank you, everybody, and keep up all your good work. We so appreciate what you're doing. We have one more. Can we take it? I think Frank Ryder's typing. Can we take it, Gary? One more?
Certainly.
Okay, I don't see what he says. Oh, Frank was saying, very nice session. Frank is like an expert on Medicaid. Anybody want to know?
Yay.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. Best